And we're back again. I took a quick break to rank every Best Picture winner for some reason. Now we return to the MCU journey of reviewing all these movies in the lead up to Doomsday later this year. Phase 1 and 2 down, now it's time for, I think inarguably, the peak of the MCU. Phase 3, where the movies got bigger, in some ways better, in some ways worse, but most importantly, they built up to the climax of the Infinity Saga. Spoilers ahead, also just want to say I will not be including the Spider-Man movies here. I'm sorry, but that's because in July when Brand New Day comes out, I'm gonna make a whole video ranking all the Spider-Man movies, including the Holland ones. Anyway, let's dive right into it, starting with... From the outside, it might seem funny that this is technically part of the Captain America trilogy when it really is more of an Avengers film. It's certainly a better, more interesting one than Age of Ultron was. But when you get into it, it is still pretty tightly focused on the Cap, Bucky, and Tony central plot, and that does showcase what I think is most impressive about the Russos' later MCU films. Balance. With films with this many characters, it could be very easy to get lost in the sauce and have the film feel overstuffed, but consistently, the Russos have shown an ability to provide basically every character with satisfying moments in the spotlight, while keeping the story flowing via the momentum of a central plot thread. And even with all the spectacle around it, which we'll get to, the central plot thread here with Cap, Bucky, Tony, and Zemo is very compelling. First of all, let's get this out the way. I was and remain Team Cap. Honestly, at the time, I didn't really think much about it. I was just like, yeah, I like Captain America more than I like Iron Man. Get his ass, Cap. But in hindsight, looking at their actual stances, while Tony's isn't insane, I feel like the Cap position is way more correct in like every single way. Quick refresher, Tony believes the Avengers should be working underneath the powers that be and be held more accountable and reined in, while Cap believes the Avengers need to work independently to be effective. Now, I just want to say, in the MCU, about 2 years before this movie, it was revealed that the highest levels of the government and intelligence agencies had been infiltrated by secret Nazi death cultists. You now want the Avengers to be entrusted to do their work underneath those same institutions? Also, this argument about superheroes causing so much damage has always been so stupid to me. It's not like they're doing it on purpose, unless you're like Man of Steel, Superman, I guess. They're doing it in pursuit of stopping the villains who are causing the destruction. What possibly would change about the levels of destruction if the government were the ones in charge of the Avengers? Like, the supervillain would still pick up the entire city, and there would be collateral damage in the process of stopping that. Also, I was gonna write a whole thing here about how if this was the real world and not the MCU, yes, you'd maybe want these heroes to be regulated and not flying around willy-nilly, but knowing our governments, honestly, probably not. But this is the MCU where we know that these are the heroes, the good guys, and the government is way more shitty and corrupt than these actual gods and geniuses and bastions of morality. You think the MCU government wouldn't have wanted to make an Ultron-style program if they were in charge? They were using the Hydra tech in the Avengers to make weapons. Anyway, Team Cap is the way to go. I'm sorry if you are an offended bozo on Team Iron Man. That all said, given the kind of obvious subjective correctness of one side of this debate, the film does a good job of making it a divide in the team that you believe. You can believe that Tony Stark would get guilt-tripped into this position. RDJ charismas his way into some half-convincing arguments, if you don't think about them too much. And you know his stubborn arrogance meeting Cap's stubborn standing up for his beliefsness is gonna be an unstoppable object, immovable force type conflict. Plus you throw in Bucky being Cap's bestie and under mind control, but causing lots of chaos that has other heroes wanting him dead, and you can see how this divide happens. Also, the previous films did a good job of setting up how at odds these two personalities are, that them finally cracking, not like that, feels natural. So the film has this good central conflict, and then it builds a comic book spectacle around that is largely fantastic. First of all, the other characters here get cool little mini arcs, which again, it's neat that they find ways to squeeze those in without it feeling overstuffed, Vision and Wanda in particular. We also get the introduction of two of the biggest superheroes in the MCU, Black Panther and Spider-Man here, and both are handled excellently. Rest in peace Chadwick Boseman, he was such a flawless pick for T'Challa. He has the regalness and authority of a king, but he's also cool and likable. He's not like a boring, stoic guy. I hate to unironically use the phrase aura, but bro's aura was crazy, and the Black Panther suit is so badass, as is his fighting. His introduction to the MCU being through the revenge he wants to take for the murder of his father, but it ending with him finding that this isn't the way. Great mini arc as well. Just a perfect folding in of this character and the Wakandan section of the MCU into these films. Again, these Russo films are some of the best examples of how to integrate future setups without it feeling forced. And then we get Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Again, perfect casting. I'm not saying necessarily he's the best Spider-Man, but he is the first Spider-Man who actually looks like he's 15. He's very likable and nerdy in a way that isn't cartoonish. He feels like a 2010s nerd, you know? And his charisma or comedic approach to the character, like his general vibe, really fits into the MCU. Now, how do we feel about the suit? Oh, we'll get to that later on. But as a personality in the film, he fits in very well. Also, I know some of you younger viewers might not remember this, but there was a time when Spider-Man being in the MCU was a far-off pipe dream. So to actually see this character interacting with Tony and Cap was pretty crazy. Now, I did slightly touch on problems I have there with Spider-Man's suit, and that can transition us into action and effects, around which I think there are some pros and cons. In comparison to the Russo's last entry, The Winter Soldier, I think the action here is larger scale and more comic booky, and they handle that largely well. However, I would say just action quality-wise, Winter Soldier's is a bit more consistent and a bit more gripping. That being said, it is a different challenge from doing cool, boring hand-to-hand action to doing splash page crazy heroes with crazy powers fighting each other. Like I said, each hero gets a little moment to show off their powers. The interaction of different heroes' powers and their personalities, which comes across in some of the action, is quite exciting. The airport battle is really just comic book goodness, and the final confrontation does feel a bit more gritty Winter Soldier-like. Like they're just beating the snot out of each other. It's great. My only problem with it is, and again, as opposed to Winter Soldier, some of the effects here are a little rough. Now, people have talked about the MCU lighting and or color grading issues, and that's also certainly a reason why some of this looks a little off, kind of flat, but just like effects-wise, I'll never get over just how bad these shots of Spider-Man and Iron Man look. I remember distinctly being in the cinema, genuinely thinking we were seeing like a bootlegged copy of the movie or something. The Russo films in general have this. I'd say 80% of the superhero action is pretty incredible, and the way it captures the comic book feel is great, and it can't all look flawless, but then like 20% of it is just bad or like unfinished looking. I'm still generally very pleased with the action here, but that should be said. The CGI Spider-Man suit in general also I don't love. I like the actual design of it, but it definitely looks a little too sleek and not real, which is weird since they had this real suit on set and then I guess just computered over it. Overall, I think Civil War walks the line really well between being a more personal film about a few central characters while also being an epic event comic book film. Also, just looking back, it's crazy we got this and Age of Ultron in back-to-back years. Like nowadays, seeing this number of cool characters together on screen feels like it's from a bygone era, but in the prime MCU, you would just get this kind of epic crossover as a Captain America film. I have some issues with the visuals at times, and you could poke a couple holes in the plot and character motivations, but they do a good job of making the central ideological divide here convincing, and the action scene's exciting. I'll give Civil War 4 stars. We then move on to the first MCU solo origin movie in a minute, Doctor Strange. Now, the character of Doctor Strange has gone on to be quite popular and recognizable, largely due to his appearances in other people's movies, but his actual introduction to the MCU remains a bit of a forgotten film. Looking back on it, I wouldn't exactly call it a hidden gem, but it's not as bad or generic as some of these MCU solo adventures have been. It's pretty solid. I can, however, also understand why it's fallen a bit by the wayside, particularly given the other films in this phase that it's surrounded by. On the MCU's casting almost always being spot on, Benedict Cumberbatch is a perfect pick for Doctor Strange, while other names that were being thrown around could have been cool, like Joaquin Phoenix. There's something to a good actor who is also integratable into the MCU. This is sort of how I feel about Ed Norton versus Mark Ruffalo. Ed Norton is great, maybe a better actor than Mark Ruffalo, who's to say? But can I picture him in these big comic book team-ups in the same way that Mark Ruffalo has been integrated? Not really. And I can't really picture Joaquin Phoenix fighting Thanos, you know? Benedict Cumberbatch brings the acting chops, he plays the arrogant asshole who is humbled into being the hero well, while also being able to quip and play off of the silly comic book world around him. On that character arc though, that is a part of the film that isn't that interesting, because it's a pretty basic asshole to hero type of arc that we've seen in lots of movies before, specifically in the MCU multiple times. And while I love Cumberbatch, the character of Strange, and the movie in general, doesn't have an enormous amount of charisma to make you forget that fact. So when we're doing the character development stuff, you might zone out a bit, cause yeah, you know where this is going. Nothing too original here. And where the film could go more original, that being its setting and comic book nature, introducing the magic corner of the MCU, it's kinda tame. People give Doctor Strange 2 a lot of grief for being too goofy, but I like that. That's what can make this character and his movies stand out more. Crazy magic stuff. Even putting aside Doctor Strange 2, the later Avengers movies prove this. But here, he is mostly just making magic whips and shields. We do get cool moments, the big trip scene thanks to the Ancient One, the Dormammu stuff, the folding Inception City, but I maybe would have liked just a little more. My primary memories of this movie are Benedict Cumberbatch hanging out in this kind of dingy temple type building in Nepal, and like that's kinda it. Which I feel like shouldn't be the case for a character with powers this crazy. On that though, I will give the film credit. With a lot of these MCU films, the first 2 acts are more interesting, and then the finale can kind of just become generic hero-villain fighting. The 3rd act here heavily carries the movie. The Inception-style backdrop for that final battle is pretty crazy and impressive. The use of the Time Stone is fun. And as mentioned, the Dormammu bit is a very fun and relatively unique way to end an MCU movie. It's not just him beating up the generic villain, there's a bit more cleverness here to how he has to save the day. Plus it completes his journey to being the selfless hero in a pretty cool way. I did mention the generic villain here. I love you, Mads Mikkelsen. Keep repping Denmark on the big screen. But yeah, Kai Kaecilius is a very nothing villain, even if he does get the iconic Mr. Doctor bit.
Mr. Doctor.
And the movie's general MCU genericness does shine through at some moments more than others. Cumberbatch does fit in the MCU, but some of the trademark MCU quips are a little forced feeling here. See the Beyonce gag? I also do like Wong more later on when they get a bit of a better grasp on what kind of character they want him to be. Here, as a stoic guy who they play jokes off of, he's fine. Tilda Swinton is suitably mystical and mysterious as the Ancient One, but I wouldn't say a terribly memorable character, except for her just absolutely eating shit on the concrete. I remember that part. Chiwetel Ejiofor is fine. The romance with Rachel McAdams is fine. Again, far more interesting in Multiverse of Madness, but whatever. That's the story of Doctor Strange, though. It's fine. Pretty generic, but generally watchable, with some fun moments sprinkled in. Considering they got Scott Derrickson for this horror director, it would have been nice if there was a little more sauce to it. I feel like you could have done some weird horror around the idea of your body being broken and it being fixed with magic and entering this new realm of weirdness and fantasy. I don't need it to be what the Clayface movie looks like it's gonna be, but something more. Again, Multiverse of Madness is not a peak Sam Raimi movie, but it does have Sam Raimi's fingerprints on it more than most MCU movies have their director's prints on them. I know lots of people disagree with me. My friend and I actually debated Doctor Strange 1 versus 2 over on my podcast, the Poorly Planned Podcast, linked here. But I do personally prefer the second one, for that reason that it commits to it a bit more. This is the introduction of magic into the MCU, so you want to ease audiences into it, I get that. But still, even putting magic aside, just stylistically, a little more sauce would have been nice. I'll give Doctor Strange 3 stars. We then come to the follow-up to probably my favorite MCU movie, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Now that statement in itself is both a blessing and a curse to this film. When there's a follow-up to one of your favorite movies, on the way in you're going to be unbelievably excited, but as you're watching it, it's almost impossible for it to live up to your expectations. Even if it's objectively better than the first film in every way, it's still going to be basically impossible for it to replicate the feelings you have associated with a film you've now loved for years and watched multiple times. So when I walked out of Guardians 2, I was a bit disappointed. With the benefit of hindsight, however, I think it is actually quite good, though I do think it might be my least favorite of the trilogy. James Gunn's Guardians movies are, I would say maybe after the first Iron Man, the most real movies of the MCU lineup. And by that I mean, yes, they have superhero movie tropes and action and powers and whatnot, but I think they exhibit the most effort being put into telling actual stories with actual arcs and not just setting up comic book theme park ride feels. And that's what's most impressive about Guardians 2 looking back on it. It takes time and care to develop these characters and take their relationships in new, interesting directions. And you can tell James Gunn has a ton of love for them. I really don't think you can make a Guardians movie without Gunn. These characters feel so personal to him. These films are all about family, but this one maybe most of all. You have Peter meeting his father and the complicated feelings there of having an absent dad who then shows up out of nowhere and also turns out to be a planet or whatever. But then that's supplemented with, I would argue, maybe even more interesting dynamics between Gamora and Nebula and between Rocket and Yondu. Gamora and Nebula's story from beginning to end may be the most human and well-developed relationship in the MCU. And Rocket and Yondu finding common ground in their faults and searches for redemption in and amongst their dislike for one another was really unexpected but well done. And again, I gotta say, when you have not one, not two, but 3 compelling and nuanced character dynamics in an MCU movie, that is worth a lot of credit. And this culminates in a genuinely very touching ending, with Yondu's funeral and that Cat Stevens song playing and the fireworks. Man, that's actually beautiful. Why is Guardians of the Galaxy 2 making me cry? My only real problem with the emotional storytelling here is that I do think you can get a tiny bit of emotional whiplash. This is a very goofy movie, and then it will just stop and ask you to listen to this character dramatically monologuing about his past while looking into the middle distance. And those scenes largely work, but it can be a bit of a sharp shift. I think in comparison to Guardians 1, this film's jokes are even sillier, and its serious moments are even more melodramatic. So there is some tension in swinging between those. On the humor, Gunn gets a bit more James Gunny with the jokes here.
Did you make a penis?
Dude.
He has a certain type of humor that works for like 70 to 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time, it falls pretty flat. The main style of joke I associate with him is someone says or does something awkward or weird, and then characters acknowledge it and riff on it for a bit. And again, that can be very funny at times, but sometimes it just turns into, you're kind of running the joke into the ground here. Like, yes, his name is Taserface, that is silly, I do get it. But there's still plenty of moments in here that made me laugh. Drax especially has some memorably funny moments. As far as additions to the MCU here, I like Pom Klementieff a lot as Mantis. This more naive, innocent character she is when we first meet her works well for jokes to play off of. Baby Groot is a new addition here in a sense. He's pretty cute and not as annoying, look, it's a baby version of this character, buy all the merch, as I thought he would be. Although, as you can see from this post on my Instagram, I did in fact buy the merch. The opening action scene with him is fun, and speaking of which, there is a lot of fun space action here. Lots of colors, and like with the humor, it goes bigger and more bombastic than the first. Sometimes, though, it can feel a little shark jumpy. I know we're in a movie with talking trees and raccoons, but it can start to feel a little too cartoonish in a couple of moments. And I will say, there are parts of this film that are gorgeous, composition, colors, all that, but there are also parts of this that look like ass. Not even visual effects wise, just the way these scenes look. It just looks bad. For some reason, a lot of the scenes with Ego just look kind of stinky. And the music, again, it's impossible to follow up the first film's awesome mix, because that came out of nowhere and was a super fun element of that film that became iconic. So now that you're expecting it, it's going to be very hard to live up to, but there's still a lot of banging tracks in here. Not as good as the first films, but a great tape. So overall, I think Guardians 2 does go bigger than the first film, and when that means diving deeper into these characters, that's definitely a plus. That might be something it has over the first, but when it comes to action and locations and jokes, bigger isn't always better. Lots of fun action and jokes in here for sure. The majority is very fun. There are just some parts of this that stick out to me as not quite as good and maybe feeling like they're trying a bit too hard. Still a fun and surprisingly poignant MCU film. I'll give it 3.5 stars. We then come to another respected director's comedic take on a Marvel property, Taika Waititi's Thor Ragnarok. Now, given where we ended up with Taika Waititi's MCU movies, that being Thor Love and Thunder, I feel like his goodwill has run out and people look at his style of superhero film as unfunny and self-indulgent and over the top, but that would be rewriting history on what Thor Ragnarok was when it came out, which was mostly beloved and a very much needed shot in the arm for one of Marvel's biggest characters. Does it hold up as much now? Maybe not, but I don't think we should be quick to say Taika Waititi's MCU movies always sucked, because this one was pretty fun. Thor was in a weird place in the MCU at this point. He was one of the 4 biggest characters they had, but the option to just make fine, generic superhero movies was running out as the genre was evolving, and there's only so much coasting on goodwill of Avengers movies that you can do, so they decided to send Thor in a completely new direction, both in terms of physical location, by sending him out in space, and in terms of tone, by making his film an overt comedy, both of which seem quite inspired by the success of Guardians. And I think at the time, that was a really smart, inspired move. Chris Hemsworth does have solid comedic chops, and I know Australia and New Zealand are different places, but to lean into that style of wacky, slightly understated comedy that part of the world has, that really worked here. Like with Gunn, not every Waititi joke works for me. Some are a bit lame and predictable, but the offbeat, weird nature of the comedy here, especially for 2017 Marvel, was refreshing and fun. Lots of memorable lines, little funny moments, Jeff Goldblum's the Grandmaster. I would say this movie largely succeeds in being a funny comedy. The general wacky comic bookness of it is also fun, with Thor 1 and 2 being a bit more restrained in that early 2010s MCU way. This movie taking us to space, having Hulk fighting Thor in the arena, having Hela battling Valkyries, their giant dogs, and fire demons. You know, this is big, goofy sci-fi. And some of those scenes are visually very cool. They have a bit of that fun 80s death metal vibe that these Waititi movies, at the best of times, have. I also like seeing Mark Ruffalo's Hulk in both this comedic and comic booky environment. Comedic, because Ruffalo is a funny actor. He has some great moments here playing off of Thor. And seeing his Hulk in this Planet Hulk type of environment. I know this movie has very little to do with Planet Hulk, and comparing it to that comic is probably insulting, but you know, Hulk in space is cool, and then on Asgard, that's fun to see. That is this film's best side. It's fun, comedic goofiness. But the problem there is that that's the film's only side, really. This movie is a sugar rush. It's only really interested in silly jokes and space fights, which is entertaining, but there's very little to emotionally tie you to it. Whenever it tries to have a more emotional beat or some form of character arc, it's not terribly compelling. You can almost feel the movie being like, yeah, I know, sorry, we gotta get this out of the way. We have to do a bit of a story, but we'll get to the fun colors and jokes and stuff in a second, don't worry. Is that better than ham-fistedly cramming in an emotional storyline that doesn't work at all? Possibly. But the Guardians films show you can do emotions and wacky jokes in the same movie. This movie is also pretty ugly at times, or just like SNL looking. This is a far bigger problem in Love and Thunder. But when the movie isn't doing grand big space opera battles, and it's just like characters talking, there is a real SNL quality to it with the flat lighting and the basic way it's shot. It doesn't look very cinematic at all. Again, in these scenes, it's like the movie's focus is just on making you laugh, and if it looks interesting, it's not that important. I would say it's like a typical comedy movie, but Waititi's other comedies are shot better than this, so I don't know, maybe he just had a bit of trouble adjusting to the MCU-style big budget production. Ultimately, there's not an enormous amount to say about Ragnarok. If you don't like Waititi's style of comedy, you will hate this. If you do like it, you'll find a lot of fun here. I think I liked it more when I was 15 when it came out. Now it doesn't make me laugh as much, but it's got amusing, charming moments. It helped reinvigorate this character, and at a bare minimum, feels like a director's movie in the MCU more than a lot of these films. This feels like a Taika Waititi MCU movie, and while in time, that won't always be a good thing, in this case it makes it pretty enjoyable. I'll give Thor Ragnarok 3.5 stars. We then come to what I would say, maybe besides the Avengers movies, is the MCU film that had the biggest pop culture impact. Black Panther. When Black Panther came out, it was a huge deal. It really felt like a significant moment in time. People loved this character, this world, this villain, and the representation of a black superhero on the big screen that wasn't the movie Steel with Shaq or Catwoman with Halle Berry. And on that, beyond the main character, the representation of Africa itself in this film, embracing traditional aspects of the culture and making it cool, it's awesome. There's a Nathan Zed video on this film that explains this point really well.
The culture especially, the culture is usually seen as weird, and in this movie it was just presented as how it is.
Anyway, I think what this movie was for pop culture, in America specifically, was really cool. What's it like just as a film? Really good. Like I said with Civil War, Boseman is so perfect as T'Challa, and here we get more of this conflicted king versus hero internal battle that he struggles with, having to reckon with some of the failings of his own family and his country's ideology, and Boseman pulls all that off marvelously. The cast all around is so stacked. I mean, we basically got the Jordan Peele cinematic universe here. Angela Bassett, Forrest Whitaker, Sterling K. Brown. Incredible. Letitia Wright is fun as Shuri. The what are those bit was cringe at the time, but in hindsight is kind of a nice time capsule of 2018. I will say, given how talented she is, I would have liked to see Lupita Nyong'o as Nakia get more to do in this film, or the next one. Just based on pure acting ability, Nyong'o might be like a top 10 actor in the MCU, and the fact that they gave her, to be honest, a pretty nothing character is a bit disappointing. On that note, while I do love the way Wakanda is brought to life on the big screen here, there's a reason Wakanda became such an iconic fictional place, like everyone knows Wakanda when you reference it, I would have maybe liked a little more exploration of it. We get some establishing shots and some aspects of the culture, but in terms of places we spend time in the movie, it does feel like 3 or 4 main locations. Those places are cool, but I guess I didn't really get the vibe that this is a whole country that exists outside of these main locations, with civilians just going about their day-to-day. Still though, what we do get is cool. On coolness, the film does have much more sauce than your typical MCU movie. I mean, we're going to be talking about Ant-Man and the Wasp and Captain Marvel momentarily, 2 of the least sauce-having films possibly ever made. Here, you can feel the effort to give this some more flavor. Ryan Coogler, while not as present as a director as he is in his non-MCU work, is still able to shine through a bit here with some stylistically cool moments. We also have great music on both the soundtrack and score fronts. Ludwig Göransson brings us that iconic Wakanda drum theme, and Kendrick Lamar leads a great album that's integrated well into the film. Hearing all the stars still fills me with a February 2018 nostalgia of wonder and joy that my cold dead 2026 heart desperately longs for. And speaking of sauce, man, the villains here? First of all, Andy Serkis as Klaue from Age of Ultron. He continues to be a weird creep, and that's quite enjoyable. And then we got Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger, and no pun intended, he kills it here. Again, there's a reason this performance became iconic. Quotable lines, badass look, and a fleshed out motivation that you can actually understand and sympathize with, despite the villainous path he goes down, which makes for a very compelling conflict with the hero. The hero ends up actually learning stuff from the villain, which again is the kind of storytelling you don't really see in an MCU movie. This movie in general just has a more classic story feel to it than the assembly line MCU films we get later. Like when Killmonger throws T'Challa off the waterfall and becomes king, and T'Challa has to make a comeback. I don't know why, but this just feels like plot progression you'd see in a real movie, as opposed to the generic beat-by-beat, you-see-it-all-coming plots of other superhero films. All that glaze aside though, the movie's third act, yeah, this is definitely an MCU movie. Now, I'm 90% sure in my original review for this film when it came out, I said something like, the first 2/3 are pretty good, but the last third is when it becomes awesome. And I honestly don't know what I was talking about there. I was straight up talking out my ass. The last third of this movie is by far the worst part. There's interesting conflicts and cool characters and world building in the first 2/3, and then we get the superhero fights a CGI villain who's a slightly different version of himself bit. And it's just kinda boring. There are neat moments in the action, for sure. I like the use of the suit energy redistribution thing, but a lot of the action feels weightless and kinda lame, and a lot of it looks bad. Generally, this looks better than a lot of MCU movies, though there are still parts of it that look a bit ugly. But here, just the CGI figures bouncing around, smacking each other, it's not great. When he's riding that rhino or whatever, conceptually, that should be super cool, but it just looks like ass. I should note, there is other cool action throughout. The introduction of Black Panther, the whole South Korea sequence is pretty awesome. I also really like the cool, high-tech James Bond kind of vibes there. That's all great. I was gonna say maybe Black Panther just works better in the cover of night, makes him more badass, Batman style. Maybe the suit just doesn't look as good in the daytime. But we've seen him in daylight before and since, and it wasn't really a problem. Plus he's in the dark here and it still looks bad, so I don't know. It's just how the CGI and action were done here that were just kind of stinky. That said though, the actual ending with Killmonger in the sunset, and then that kid being amazed by T'Challa, fantastic stuff. The kid moment is a top 3 MCU movie ending for sure, and it sums up the cultural moment around this film perfectly as well. So overall, Black Panther is a very solid MCU film with memorable characters, moments, and music that is brought down a bit by a lackluster third act and some underutilized potential. I think it'll be remembered more for the moment it was than the actual film, but the actual film is still pretty badass. I'll give it 3.5 stars. With all that, we've now come to the big one. Part 1 of the massive culmination of all these movies, what all of this has been building to, Avengers Infinity War. And man, was I excited for this movie. I remember when that second trailer came out, we all watched it in our classroom after school had ended. I was posting pictures of the poster at the cinema, writing stuff like one more week. This was an event for the world in general. This had that big movie feel that we've only gotten a couple of times since. But man, for me specifically, whose thing had been the MCU for years, I can't tell you how hyped I was. I don't think I've ever been as excited for a movie. So when I first saw it, it was kind of hard to even judge. When you're that excited for something and that invested in the actual characters and story, you're not even really thinking about the quality of the film that much. You're more just full of adrenaline and trying to absorb the actual happenings, the things these characters are doing and the effects it'll have on this universe. And I think because of that, I was maybe slightly underwhelmed or deflated coming out of it the first time. It's like you've built this up for years at this point and now it's over. I didn't even really know how much I liked it. I was just like, that's that then. It took me a second viewing to get more of a feel for it, and the second time around, I liked it more. I've since watched it many times over the years, once with my whole family around Christmas time, which I cherish as a special memory, and I've stood by that it's a very fun, satisfying finale film. However, I recently rewatched it for the first time in years, and my current take is, this movie is genuinely incredible. Now, I've caught some flack for this, because I watch lots of different types of movies, and someone might say, how can you give this the same rating as Citizen Kane, 8.5? And that's just such a moot comparison because they're playing in different fields. Those films are brilliant at being intelligent, thematically rich films. Infinity War is obviously not as deep or well-made, but it's a different kind of movie. It's meant to be a comic book event film, capturing an absurd number of characters crossing over in what's basically an extended climax of an 18-film build-up, and I think it does that borderline perfectly. I mentioned in a video on my second channel, BHL2, about which superhero movies deserved Oscars, that if they had the casting Oscar back in 2019, Infinity War should have won that, because the number of characters they fit into this with brilliant casting choices is so impressive, and to not make it feel overstuffed is mind-blowing to me. That is a genuine achievement in filmmaking. You can talk about the MCU not being cinema all you want, and I largely agree with you. We can get into that some other time. But that feat actually takes an enormous amount of skill. We've seen films with far fewer characters fail at not making the movie feel overstuffed. This manages to do it. I was just so impressed on my rewatch of how much happens in this and how exciting it is. This is like a 3-hour climax of a story, by the way. Get your mind out of the gutter. And it works. That shouldn't work. It works. This has that characters crossing over magic that we haven't really seen properly since the first Avengers. Getting to see the Guardians interacting with the Avengers for the first time was a ton of fun. Doctor Strange meets Tony Stark and predictably doesn't get along with him was great. The Wakandans fighting with the Avengers. It's all so cool. And you get satisfying moments with every character, either fun action beats, funny lines, actual moments that make sense for the characters, while balancing screen time. Like, you can complain Captain America doesn't get much to do in this one, but he slots perfectly into the story they're telling for this film, and then they do make up for it by having him basically be the main character of the next one. But I think what's most impressive about this film is it does all this MCU culmination stuff, and it still actually has themes and a real story at the center of it with Thanos. That's what some of these movies can sometimes miss, and why they can just be characters and references and all that without much beneath them. That's a tiny bit of a problem I think Endgame has. We'll get to that. I describe this as more of an event than a movie, but the Thanos thread tying the whole thing together makes it still a story that gives it shape and cohesion. So it isn't just superhero bullshit. It makes that 3-hour climax thing work. Again, stop. And also to do that with a villain, when villains are something the MCU has historically struggled with in general, is amazing. Josh Brolin is brilliant, and there are reasons Thanos became so iconic. The performance, the effects, and his backstory and motivation being explained where you don't agree with him, probably, but you understand why he's doing what he's doing. He's not just a random asshole, he has a goal he's working towards, which he achieves. And following him on that journey with the Infinity War stuff playing out around it was a fantastic choice from the writers. And again, he wins, man. That was so crazy back in 2018. I know it's a comic book thing, so of course they're not actually gonna kill Spider-Man and Black Panther permanently, but this universe's story was so engrossing to me at the time, and to a lot of people, that it didn't really matter, you know they'll come back. It's just crazy that they ended the movie like that. The biggest movie in the franchise ended with half the fan favorites dying, and the scene itself is excellent. The quiet of the confusion and horror of what's happening, especially out on Titan with the crackling thunder in the back. Bro, Spider-Man's whimpering and begging for his life? That's super messed up. After Homecoming, I was really invested in this version of Peter Parker, and to see him go out like that, not triumphantly, but scared and crying in Tony's arms because the heroes failed, what a moment, man. That is iconic. That will be talked about by people of my generation for years to come. But yeah, man, it low-key felt like I'd lost to Thanos when that happened. On the superhero stuff around the Thanos central story, I just can't stress enough how satisfying this is. It just does the comic book event perfectly. The opening sets up the villain and his power levels perfectly. He kills a fan favorite. There are characters meeting. There are fun action scenes with clever uses of the hero's powers. That's another way the film makes the number of characters work. There was clearly lots of time put in here to utilize the hero's different abilities in the most fun ways. So it's not just random explosions and fighting. There's a point to knowing what these characters can do because it then plays into the action in fun ways. Again, there's a real respect for the fans of the these movies from the writers and the Russos here that I really appreciate. We have crazy different environments, spaceships and planets and Wakanda and dying stars, magic and tech and looking through time, and holy shit, man. I don't know if as I'm getting older, I'm like more susceptible to stimulating content. Like I feel like when I first saw this movie, I went, wow, that was a cool movie. This time when I watched it, I was like, oh my god, this is crazy, bro. There's so much shit going on. And like 99% of it is insanely cool. That Doctor Strange Thanos battle, bro. Tony and Thanos' brief but powerful interactions. Wanda having to kill Vision. Thanos having to kill Gamora. At this point, I'm just naming interesting moments, but I really do think this is an exceptional work of tying together all these elements. Action, powers, story, characters. In terms of negatives, there are very few here. A lot of the humor does work for me, but there are a few quips that I did think were a bit unnecessary and annoying. In the opening scene, which is pretty atmospheric and intense, Thanos has so much aura. We really didn't need Thor cracking a lame MCU quip. And there are a few moments like this throughout where it's just like, you could have cut like 10% of the jokes here. That being said, still a funny movie on the whole. There are some moments where the effects or green screen or whatever are bad. This happened in Civil War as well, and in Endgame. But considering how many effects are in this movie, considering how crazy this movie is, I can forgive it. And that's really it for complaints. I think the main point I would make about this film as to why it works so well is that it is phenomenally paced. Watching the Russos walk that tightrope of keeping the movie insanely comic booky with tons of stuff going on, while making it a digestible story is, I think, their greatest achievement as filmmakers. Overall, Avengers Infinity War isn't exactly a movie I would just throw on every once in a while. It's a movie you want to be in the mood for. It's like going out for a huge celebratory dinner. You want to build up to it a bit. It's a lot. I think it's so fun, so epic. This has been built up for years, and for them to actually pull it off and make it as exciting and fun and crazy as an MCU fan would hope for, I think deserves enormous praise. I don't know if it's a better film than something like Winter Soldier or Guardians, because again, it's not really a film. That sounds like an insult, it's not. And it does still have that Thanos story and character moments throughout that give it thematic substance, so it isn't just nonsense. I don't know, film, event, whatever. I'm rambling here. I love it. I'll give it 4.5 stars. We then follow up this incredible display of mastery of the comic book film art form with the Ant-Man sequel. Epic. Now, not gonna lie, for a long time on my Letterboxd ranking of the MCU movies, this was at the bottom for me. But lucky for Paul Rudd, Marvel has produced more stinkers since then that surpass it, although one of those stinkers does star Paul Rudd as well. Whoops. So with some of the newer MCU stuff in mind, it maybe isn't that bad, it's just so bland. But honestly, that might be worse. Quantumania and Love and Thunder are annoying, but I have more to say about them than Ant-Man and the Wasp. Ant-Man and the Wasp is okay-ish, but even in 2018, with the hype of Infinity War still burning in my veins, I walked out of this thinking, okay, that sure was a movie. Like, this was prime MCU, bro. For me to have such an indifferent reaction sandwiched between Avengers movies, it's crazy. I can start with the stuff I did like. There's some okay stuff in here. I think the de-aging is very good, better than the first. You can see the technological improvements. Although he doesn't get a ton of play here, I think Walton Goggins is fun as the slimy business side villain. That might just be my Goggins bias, though. I am a bit of a Goggin head. Ghost's powers are cool. The bit when Ant-Man's half small was kind of fun. The Quantum Realm stuff looks better than it does in Quantumania, I guess. And the setup for Endgame at the end with the Dutch angle pull-in shot of Hank and company turning to dust was pretty hype. Honestly, on that note of the ending, the coolest part of the film might be the credits. These are kind of sick. But besides these little specifics, what about this is engaging? It's shot so boringly, it's shot lit and color corrected more boringly than the first film. The first film had kind of a cheap sitcom-y look, but it looked a little fun. This just epitomizes that Marvel visual style that people complain about, and the story here is so boring too. I'm sorry, again, maybe this is just me. I said this with Ant-Man 1. I do not care about the Pims. I genuinely would rather watch Season 2 of Secret Invasion with whatever weird-ass Nick Fury's Married to a Skrull plot they were doing than engage with this tedious family drama. All these actors are likable, Michelle Pfeiffer's good here, but these characters are just so dull. Evangeline Lilly's likable, but Hope Van Dyne, such a boring character. Paul Rudd's likable, but Scott as a character does not have much going on in this movie. In the first one, at least, he had that redemption, father, whatever arc. Here, he either doesn't have an arc, or whatever arc he may have was so uninteresting that I've genuinely forgotten about it. They got Lawrence Fishburne, who has been known to be cool and memorable in movies at times, and he plays maybe the most forgettable character in the MCU. Unless you're a diehard Ant-Man and the Wasp fan, can you tell me what this guy's deal was? Anyway, I don't want to just complain and say the word boring over and over again, but that really is just how I feel about this. There is some cool size-changing action here, but it's just not very memorable. Most of the cool bits were in the trailer, or they're not that much more interesting or fun than stuff we've seen in previous films. Even the Giant Man stuff wasn't that hype, because we'd seen it before, plus in a way cooler scenario. I think I was also bummed that this committed less to being a straight-up comedy. Ant-Man feels like one of those 2010s American comedies, which comes with some shortcomings, but also a bit of coziness and some funny moments. This is much more a generic MCU movie than a comedy. Even Luis, who was really funny in the first one, he gets a couple moments here and they don't hit as hard. The bit where he does the storytelling thing feels more like a fan-servicey callback than a genuinely funny moment on its own. Overall, Ant-Man and the Wasp is not atrocious, it's got some decent moments, and it's not an MCU thing that will make someone you're watching it with say, turn this off, as we'll get to with some others, but it is just very uninteresting to me, and I have less than zero interest in rewatching it. I'll give it 2.5 stars. We then come to another entry between the big Avengers finale films that was, hate to say it, also very bland, Captain Marvel. Is this better than Ant-Man and the Wasp? Yeah, I would say so, but they fall into a very similar category of uninteresting MCU movies to me. It's just kinda nothing. The fact that this made $1 billion is kinda crazy. I mean, it was cool to see a female-led MCU movie for the first time, and for it to do that well. It's nice the girls now had a leading MCU hero to be a fan of, but it would have been even better if the movie was also good. This is a victim of similar problems as the last one being that it has a very strong cast reduced to playing pretty dull characters. Brie Larson is charismatic, I think she's a good actress and could fit into the MCU well, but the character of Carol Danvers is not very interesting. Brie Larson just has nothing really to work with here. She's just a classic MCU, generally stoic and heroic character, will make the odd quip here and there. The details of her personal journey of discovery and being betrayed or lied to or whatever's going on here is not given enough weight or done well enough to outweigh her general generic MCU hero-ness. Jude Law is a great actor. As the villain Yon-Rogg, he is a generic MCU bad guy who has the same suit and powers as the hero, and they know each other and then they fight and whatever. Annette Bening, Lashana Lynch, serviceable but not memorable. Ben Mendelsohn as Talos, I think is the standout here, but also another example of wasted potential, with him and the Skrulls. I feel like there's so much interesting stuff you can do with a shape-shifting group of aliens coming to Earth as refugees, both in terms of action and mystery, and Carol realizing they're not the villain she was led to believe. But like with Secret Invasion, though not as bad as that, here there's not much interesting done with the shape-shifting aspect or the story aspect. The Skrull storyline is probably the most interesting part of the film, but it's not given a lot of time to develop because we have to fit in all the normal MCU stuff in here, so it ends up being pretty surface level. In terms of the look of the film, I wouldn't say this is as bland looking as Ant-Man 2, but it's close, particularly once we get to Earth. A lot of brown, gray, blah MCU look to it. In space, there are some cooler visuals, but man, there's also some truly awful CGI in this. Some of the worst CGI in the MCU up until this point. There is good stuff, don't get me wrong, but a lot of that final battle, I mean, kinda inexcusably bad CGI for a movie with this big of a budget in 2019. Also, this void room, this green screen, whatever's going on here, this looks bad too. To be fair though, once again, the de-aging does look good here. Coulson looks a bit off, not gonna lie, but Sam Jackson looks basically perfect. Also, just to go back to blandness, but even Carol's powers are kinda bland. She's just sort of very powerful and flies and shoots light. I guess those are Captain Marvel's powers. It's just not that interesting in this movie. Also, regarding MCU humor, this one has some fine nose laugh jokes, but I do think the cat humor is a bit cringe. Maybe this is not fair, but cat humor to me is a bit like screaming goat humor. Like, yes, cats can be funny and cute, but it has a very late 2000s, early 2010s internet feel to it, where it feels like studio executives are just now catching up on like, whoa, have you seen this keyboard cat? Aren't cats funny? Let's put that in the movie. That'll blow people away. Space cat. Can you believe it? The cat gets some charming moments, and it's not nearly as, lol, look at the cats, as some of the Marvel's humor is. But still, I'm sorry to all the Goose fans out there. Didn't do a ton for me. Overall, Captain Marvel is not awful. The Marvels certainly makes it look better, but it is up there with Ant-Man and the Wasp and The Incredible Hulk as one of the most generic, flavorless MCU movies for me. Fine enough, but never really want to rewatch this one either. I'll give it 2.5 stars. And then finally, here we are. It's all been leading to this. Kind of. Avengers Endgame. I was actually not as excited for Endgame as I was for Infinity War. I'm not sure why. Obviously, I was still extremely hyped, but there was something about the epic, culminative build-up to Infinity War that was a bit more exciting than the more shrouded in secrecy build-up to Endgame, which was still cool in its own way. And ultimately, when the movie came out, I think it lived up to the hype. I think it's an impressive conclusion to this universe. I do, however, also think as a movie, it is not as good as Infinity War. I think in terms of being a culmination of this universe for MCU fans, it's basically perfect, but in terms of being an actual film, it falls a little flat. And there are a few very specific things about it that I just think do not work. Big gambles that I don't think pay off. But overall, I still kind of love this movie as the big finale. I love how the movie starts, for one. We get the team going after Thanos, and it has kind of a triumphant hero saving the day feel to it, but because it's at the start of the movie, it feels a bit off. And when Thor kills Thanos, it feels, effectively, totally hollow and useless. Thanos dies having won. There's nothing to do now. And then with the 5-year time jump, we really get real consequences for the snap. They were always going to bring the characters back, but having the remaining heroes having had to live in this world for 5 years adds a bit of weight to this actually mattering. And I like this depressing post-apocalypse first 45 minutes or so. We spend a decent amount of time catching up with what the Avengers are like after they lose and the world is devastated. We get a feel for what kind of world it is. Kinda normal, but just a bit sad, empty feeling. That MCU aesthetic of the streets feeling empty, where is everyone, actually works here, because yeah, half the people are dead. We get more time with Cap, which is nice, since he got sort of sidelined in Infinity War. I like the stuff with Tony and Pepper. Tony's arc in this film in general is well done. Nice to see him and Cap talking again. There's some funny moments early on.
That your plan to save the universe is based on back to to the future?
No.
Good, you had me worried there, because that'd be horseshit.
This is all well done and immersive. It gets you into the universe, ready for these heroes to come back, and then for all the crazy action to happen. Then, it's funny, you can pinpoint exactly when the film goes downhill. It's the Fat Thor intro. Actually, it's mostly the Fat Thor intro. We'll get back to that. But the precursor to that is the Professor Hulk intro. I hate what they did with Hulk here, gotta be honest. It works for what has to happen for the rest of the movie, but so much about this just feels off to me. First of all, we've spent years with this character, if you're reading the comics, decades, struggling to figure out the balance between Banner and Hulk, the man and the monster, who controls who. And especially in Infinity War, he had a whole arc where he gets his ass beat and then the Hulk can't come out again. But now, not only can the Hulk come out again, but he's figured out how to be Hulk and Banner at the same time, off screen? So the logistics of his character and his character arc are both resolved off screen. Okay, already, that's a little annoying, but hey, it's a big movie. We got a lot to cover. But I also hate how this Hulk looks in his hipster glasses and cardigan. He looks like those memes of Shrek of like every millennial couple looks like this or whatever. It's just uncanny. I don't think the CGI is that great. The original Avengers Hulk was the best Hulk CGI we've had by far. Now that was a much more real looking movie than these ones afterwards, so I get this more cartoony Hulk fits in better with what the MCU needs him to be now. But, I still don't like it. Plus he dabs. I know the joke is he's out of touch, but still. Plus he's not as big or strong as the Hulk used to be. The Hulk had so much aura, man. Now he's just like a pretty big, strong guy, I guess. But he's not like the we have a Hulk character. Also, this scene just looks bad. There are a bunch of scenes in this movie where the way it's shot and lit and color corrected just looks fake and bland. Like that testing scene. This looks terrible and fake and the jokes are lame. It's just weird because we were in this pretty intense, big climactic movie. Everyone's dead, we're all sad. And then it's a big whiplash into, look, it's Scott as a baby. He peed his pants. Classic MCU jokes. But anyway, back to the main culprit scene, Fat Thor's intro. At the time I thought, okay, interesting choice. But there was so much else going on in the movie that I just kind of moved on. Looking back on it now, I know some people like this. I think it's terrible on multiple fronts. One, I think it looks bad. The fat suit just looks cheap. I know we're in a superhero movie suspending our disbelief, but this isn't like a crazy magic thing that I'm accepting in a comic book story. This looks like a movie prop. This makes me think about Chris Hemsworth putting on the fat suit. It's almost like a fourth wall breaking joke. Two, the jokes aren't funny. Thor is fat and drunk and stupid now, and that's basically the extent of the jokes. Three, making him a big joke kind of ruins his character arc, or at least harms it. Thor has been so up and down in terms of he's arrogant, he's fish out of water, he's stoic, he's silly. I feel like in Infinity War, like I said, they found the perfect balance. He's still funny and quipping in that Gunn Waititi style, but he's serious enough that he has some of the most emotional and satisfying moments in the film. The arc of him being depressed after failing to save the universe and needing to find love for himself and purpose again is a good idea, but him being comically fat and that being the main joke, it's just kind of annoying as someone who was invested in this character arc. It almost feels like the movie is making fun of you for being invested in this silly comic book character. Also, is this kind of offensive to actually depressed people? To showcase depression as, look everyone point and laugh at how fat and drunk he is. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it now. But point being, I think it's unfunny and a big risk to take on a major character that didn't pan out. Anyway, his intro scene sucks because we have all of that on Fat Thor, plus they're playing Fortnite. Okay, I've done some hating here. I just really don't like how they did these two characters. I like other character stuff though. Like I said, Tony and Steve. Natasha gets a good ending in this. We now get to the time heist, which is the big middle chunk of the movie. The characters travel through time and go to different MCU films in order to get the stones, and I have slightly conflicted feelings on this too. On the one hand, it is cool that the MCU got so big in the build up to this finale. It's like a real universe that you can go back within it to different points and make a cool story out of it. That speaks to the expert universe building the MCU did in the Infinity Saga, and as someone who loved this universe and made a detailed timeline of it in the build-up to this, the level of accuracy and detail here did not go unappreciated. There are little callbacks and jokes, and that's nice, but I mean more they used creative aspects of the timeline that do make logical sense and check out to huge MCU nerds like myself that maybe wouldn't be the most obvious to do. Like yes, technically the Ancient One would be in New York during the first Avengers. And yeah, Gamora and Nebula would be at this point in their relationship right before Guardians 1 starts. These characters and these items would be around in the 1970s in the S.H.I.E.L.D. facility. It's not afraid to get specific with it, and for what was like the biggest, most mainstream movie, for the writers to delve into the MCU in this kind of way was cool. However, I do think this makes this a lot more of an MCU movie, even more than a comic book movie, if that makes sense. Like Infinity War to me felt like just an absolute comic book spectacle with characters and powers, all this stuff, while Endgame feels very tailored to these movies, a reward for the fans of these movies specifically, which is cool as a fan, but I actually think I like the Infinity War overall crazy comic book approach more. I feel like this could be a little alienating to the general public who follow these movies more casually. Still made $2 billion, what do I know? but it can occasionally come across as a bit fan servicey. Again, I like how they integrate different aspects of the MCU, Pym particles being used for the time travel. That's a fun way of working that in. It feels like a reward for following these movies this whole time, but I think it's so specific that it ends up not working as well or cohesively as Infinity War, in my opinion. Maybe it makes it a little less rewatchable in a way. There are actually a couple of other reasons I think this is worse than Infinity War. One is the pacing. I like the slower pacing towards the start, but then once it picks up, it starts to feel a little weird. It takes us an hour to get to the time heist, then we're doing time heist for a while, then final battle. I just feel like Infinity War had this perfect mix of characters, action, story scene, action, story, whereas this feels a little less well-balanced. And I also think this is missing the core story and thematic substance of Infinity War with Thanos and his journey to his goals that gave the movie a little more grounding. More so than Infinity War, this feels more like an event than a movie. What is the central character or thematic substance-giving element, like Thanos was for Infinity War? Or even the Tony, Cap, and Bucky and Zemo stuff was for Civil War. Tony and Cap have arcs, but they're not done in the same way as Thanos's was, where it's almost like the thesis of the movie. I do think this missing that also leads to it being a little more all over the place for me. Again, making it more MCU the movie than an actual story, if that makes sense. I feel like I've been hating so much here. I really do like this movie, I swear. I guess there's just more to pick out what it does wrong than just saying it's fun about a bunch of stuff. But I will say, a lot of this is really fun. Again, seeing the characters interact with the previous MCU movies. Even more on-the-nose moments are fun with Cap and the Hydra guys. Cap versus Cap is great. I like when they hit Star-Lord. That's funny. The Gamora and Nebula scenes are some of the more well-done character-based stuff in the film. It's cool they got Robert Redford back, and all these various actors and characters, which I think they partially did so they could have these credits at the end that are basically credits for the MCU, not just Endgame. The Black Widow Hawkeye Who's Gonna Die scene is great. They're not as emotional as Gamora's, but much better than what they deleted, where it's this big, loud battle. Doing it as a more low-key, quiet moment was definitely the right choice. I like this little moment with the whip pan. That's pretty funny.
Sorry, buddy, we got a problem.
Okay, there was some glaze there to make this not just a hate train, because I gotta go back to some more stuff I don't love in this time heist. I think some of it looks kinda bad. It's funny when they go to Avengers 2012 and you can see the color grading difference. That movie is almost too colorful, but this is just, I don't know. I don't like this look. I don't think 2014 Thanos has as much aura as Infinity War Thanos. All the stuff that made him interesting was from that movie. To bring the villain in from the past makes sense story-wise, but now he's basically just Guardians Thanos, where he looks kind of scary, but he has none of the emotional weight that Infinity War Thanos had. And the 1970s military base scene, I do like that this time travel element allows for arcs to be completed for these characters in ways that you couldn't do in a non-comic book movie. Steve and Peggy, Thor and his mom, and here Tony and his dad. But it's also a little on the nose, or has slight Darman Facebook clip and or fanfiction energy, like Iron Man meets dad and finally gets to hug him again. There are parts of it that are quite endearing, but when his dad goes,
I tell you, that kid's not even here yet, and there's nothing I wouldn't do for him.
That's a bit corny. James Darcy from Agent Carter cameo is fun though does make me think, where is Phil Coulson, bro? You got every character the MCU has ever had back, but you couldn't give a 10-second cameo to the GOAT? Come on. While Black Widow's death was effective and well done, the scene where they talk about her afterwards isn't great. It feels off and scripted and kind of unintentionally funny. And Jeremy Renner's delivery of this line is so unbelievably awful that I can't believe they actually put it in the movie.
Okay, go grab your hammer and you go find you talk to him.
Also, he says it while having this fucking haircut. That being said, the movie has had some problems so far. Been largely fun, but had problems. But when we get to this final battle here, we get that Russo's epic climactic comic book superhero action that they're so good at. I like the making of the gauntlet scene, maybe the funniest moment in the movie for me. Hulk's snap is cool, and how he's made for it, with the Gamma, again giving little moments and purpose to all the characters and paying off characters' journeys in the MCU. And afterwards, with the piece of the post-snap, and you see the birds, and they did it, and then Thanos immediately attacks. It's great. Then the big three versus Thanos is awesome. A couple of bad green screen shots here and there, but still, awesome scene. We get Cap lifting Thor's hammer, which had been built up to for years. Iconic moment, fan service, but worked in well. Fan service in the best way possible. And they also don't just have him lift the hammer. They have him do awesome stuff with it. Bouncing it off the shield, come on. This is what we want to see. And then we get the portals opening up. All the heroes returning and teaming up in the Avengers Assemble moment. The entire MCU, 21 films and 10 years of build-up. Come on. This is so hype. It's a bit like Infinity War, where when I was watching it in the cinema, it actually wasn't even that crazy for me, because I was just so locked in, trying to process all the stuff that was happening in the finale of my favorite series. Now looking back on it years later with a bit of distance, this is just an awesome scene. Again, credit to the Russos. The way they do satisfying culmination is unmatched. This whole final battle feels like it was written by MCU mega fans, but in a good way. A couple moments earlier felt a bit like fanfic. This feels like people who know what they're doing, but who are also huge fans who got access to an enormous budget and all the actors. Again, you get moments with all the characters characters you want. Falcon and Steve's little moment. Funny Star-Lord Gamora moment. Tony and Peter reuniting. There are big character moments like Captain Marvel's entry or Wanda getting to confront Thanos, which rules. There are little Easter egg throwbacks to those who followed these movies closely, like Wasp calling Steve Cap after they had a joke about this in Ant-Man 2, Spidey's instant kill mode. Again, the Russos are just masters of tying together threads and working in specific elements into a cohesive story in a fun way, without it being obnoxious, while also just making pretty awesome action. That all said though, I do still have some complaints about this finale. For one, I don't like the look of it. By that I mean this bland, exploded Avengers HQ battle setting. I know you want a simple, generic backdrop because making this final battle is already complicated enough. You also don't need a crazy background to worry about. But I don't love that superhero movies have moved away from heroes fighting in actual environments that felt real to just fighting in generic, empty boxes, like fields or planets or destroyed cities. It does just remove an element of tension and relatability. And B, this just looks kind of bad and too dark. In Infinity War, we got these environments where you could see everything. Here, how gray and kind of muddy this is kind of an odd choice for this big final comic book splash panel. Like, the charging scene is awesome because of the context of what it is, but it's so muddy looking that you almost can't tell which characters are which. This is the big comic book panel, man. I feel like it should at the very least be a little more colorful than this. I also just gotta say, the moment where all the female MCU characters team up is bad. And no, not because they're women. It's just a moment that takes you out of the movie. I do hate the argument of like, what, you can believe a talking raccoon in a tree, but women teaming up is too unrealistic? It's like, no, again, it's not that it's women, it has nothing to do with that. It's that this is such an obvious the movie stops to do a movie thing moment. Like, when this happens, you're thinking about the directors setting this up and the actors being there together and the fact that they put this together. It removes you from the story and the final battle in that moment. This is a comic book sci-fi universe where one of the superheroes is a talking raccoon. That's part of the premise of it. Every woman from the MCU honing in on this one part of the battlefield for this one shot where they all walk together and pose just doesn't make sense in the context of the scene. Why would they do this? Did they talk about this beforehand? What are the odds of all these characters appearing here simultaneously? Again, big disclaimer, I have no problem with putting a spotlight on MCU female heroes. They did that a bit in Infinity War, and it was fun and relatively plausible that these characters would end up here in this battle, but this moment as it's constructed is just dumb and briefly takes you out of the film. We then get the final moment with Tony and Thanos, and I'm so sorry, I hate to complain again, but I have some more problems here. I love the premise of this moment. You think all is lost, but Tony gets the stones off Thanos. He has his big final triumphant moment. He's undoubtedly redeemed himself and gone from selfish asshole to hero father who saves the universe by sacrificing himself. Him with the stones is badass. Thanos and his army dying in the same way the heroes died in the last film. It's great. And Tony's actual death scene is fantastic. Peter and Rhodey and Pepper saying goodbye. You can finally rest. The light going out in the arc reactor. Chef's kiss. Perfect. Wouldn't change a thing. The only thing I don't like is the I am Iron Man line. I'm sorry, I just don't think it works. I don't think this is something he would say at this moment. It was cool when he said it in Iron Man 1 because he was supposed to say it wasn't him, but he's such a cool, cocky guy that he says, I am Iron Man. It's great.
I am Iron Man.
He says it in Iron Man 2 kind of in passing in the courtroom.
I am Iron Man. The suit and I are one.
He says it in Iron Man 3.
You can take away my house, all my tricks and toys. One thing you can't take away, I am Iron Man.
Technically in a therapy session with Banner, but mostly as a narrator to the audience. My point is, it's not like a catchphrase. It's not a famous in-universe thing. It's iconic to us as fans in the real world, because that end of that first film was so iconic, but not really within the MCU. It wouldn't mean anything to Thanos, really. But above all this, I just think it's not something this character would say in this moment. I don't think Tony Stark would bust out such an earnest line like this. It's like if Han Solo said, I love you too in Empire. And to me, it just feels a bit like bad fanfic writing again. It's a line for the audience, not a line that really fits in the scene. To go back to what I was saying earlier, to me it just feels a bit too MCU the movie, if that makes sense. But for such an iconic moment, this line just doesn't work for me. I'm sorry, that's just my take. That said though, after this, I have no more complaints. I think the funeral is a perfect curtain call for the MCU. Also very comic book, every hero in a suit at the main hero's funeral. How big they've made this movie franchise comes across here, it's very impressive. They've made a movie universe that feels like a comic universe, that's pretty cool. The original arc reactor from Iron Man 1 on the water is perfect. The whole epilogue with Tony's narration is sweet. Speaking of curtain calls, I love the credits. Great credits for the MCU as a whole. Really feels like the end of this saga. So epic. I low-key occasionally go back and just watch these credits. I absolutely love Cap's ending. You can say it's cheating, the whole point of his character is he's a man out of time, and now he can use time travel, but I think that makes it perfect. The first Captain America was my first real MCU movie, and I loved his romance with Peggy, and it was all so tragic that they couldn't get that last dance. And then he gets to go back and have that last dance, and he gets the happy ending he didn't before, and that song, It's Been a Long, Long Time, plays. It's actually so perfect. I love this ending for Cap, which does have me a little worried how they're gonna bring him back. But to close out this character's story like that, at least at the time, it was wonderful. And I love how definitive of an end this feels like. There are setups for future MCU stuff. Sam is Captain America now, Thor joins the Guardians, but really the only actual unresolved plot thread is what's gonna happen when Peter and Gamora meet again. Otherwise, you could actually end these movies here. Thor and Sam's continued journeys could just be fun, and then they had more adventures, type of thing. Like how stories used to be. You can just imagine what happens next. For a franchise that was kind of built on setting up the next thing, for their biggest movie ever to actually be a bit of an ending, is something I appreciate. No post-credit scenes, you could stop watching the MCU here pretty much if you wanted to. Maybe throw on Guardians 3 as an epilogue, but this works as a conclusion, which is maybe part of why the following phases struggled a bit. But yeah, I appreciate the restraint and respect shown to the principles of storytelling, that they actually let this be more or less an actual ending. So look, overall, I go back and forth with Endgame, because as I'm watching it, I like it, but I have all these problems with it, but then by the time it ends, I'm so hyped on the comic book epic finaleness of it all, how well it wraps up characters' journeys in this universe, it leaves you on that high note, how they paid off all this buildup, very impressive. But then when I'm writing about it, I am reminded of, beneath all of the great moments and ending, there are a lot of problems with this as a film. So when I rewatched this recently, I gave it a 4. Having now written about it, I'm gonna give it a 3.5. For concluding the Infinity Saga, it is awesome. As an MCU fan, it's awesome. But as someone who also criticizes and analyzes what films do well and do poorly, there are problems here I can't ignore. I will say though, this Infinity War Endgame combo, I still absolutely love, and really was such an exceptional way to close out this chapter of the MCU. And while I think Endgame balances things the least masterfully of the Russo MCU films, for how many expectations I had going into this and how much it lived up to them, it'll always have a special place in my heart. So, those are my thoughts on the third phase of the MCU. Phases 4 and 5 will be coming in the next few months, along with a Spider-Man ranking and other videos, so stick around. But what do you think of these movies, and how would you rank them? Let me know all of your thoughts down below in the comments. While you're at it, be sure to like this video, check out my second channel for more casual movie, TV, pop culture talks, BHL2, my movie, TV, pop culture podcast, The Poorly Planned Podcast, my Letterboxd at RealBHLHudson, my Instagram, BHL_Hudson, and subscribe for more videos like the one you just watched. Thank you for watching, I'll see you next time.